Namaskar and welcome to StudyIQ. I am your friend Rahul Saigaonkar. Let's continue our discussion of NCERT Science series. You already know that we are discussing NCERT Science textbook for class 10, where we are carrying out discussion of individual chapters. Till now, we have completed chapter 1 to chapter 5. That means we have already gained insights into the topics connected to chemistry that were mentioned in the NCERT 10th textbook. Today, we will move ahead and discuss chapter 6 that talks about life processes. That means we are going to gain more and more knowledge about biology. In our class 6, class 7, class 8 and 9 interaction, we have already gained some insights. We have understood what is a cell. Cell is a structural and fundamental unit of life. We have discussed what are tissues. We have discussed what are different organ systems. We have discussed about different kinds of living organisms, unicellular and multicellular. Today, we'll build on that knowledge itself. We are going to discuss about life process, and in our subsequent chapters, we'll gain some more insights into topics connected to biology. Today's agenda is life processes. Now, what are these life processes? You do know that cell, which is the structural and the fundamental unit, it has to undergo certain process. For example, reproduction is one of the life process. Metabolism is one of the life process. For metabolism, we need nutrients, be it a unicellular organism or a multicellular organisms like humans. We need nutrients, and then we need to absorb those nutrients so that we survive. So life processes are the processes that are needed for sustenance of life, like nutrition, metabolism. Today we'll discuss about nutrition and metabolism. We'll discuss about what is this respiration. We'll discuss about transportation that is needed for survival of life. What is excretion, excretory system, both in plants and animals. And in our subsequent discussion, we'll talk about reproduction separately, because there is a chapter itself which is dedicated, chapter 8, how do organisms reproduce. We'll talk about the life process of reproduction in our subsequent discussion. So let's begin the first interaction, that is nutrition. Now, we have already established that any living organism, be it unicellular or multicellular, they need certain nutrients for their survival. The cell organelles, they need oxygen, they need water, and they need nutrients, that is carbohydrates, proteins, lipids. They need vitamins, they need other micro and macro elements. So nutrition is the general requirement of any organism for energy and for maintenance of the life process. Now, we need to maintain our body temperature at an optimum level. We need energy to carry out our basic work, right? Now, when we talk about living organisms, how do they gain their nutrition? When we dissect a little into this topic, we'll understand that living organisms can be divided into two categories broadly. One kind of organisms which can produce their own foods. Those are called autotrophs. And the other category is us humans and animals who rely on other organisms or who rely on other things to get their nutrition. So nutrition or systems of nutrition can be divided broadly into two categories: autotrophic organisms or autotrophic nutrition and heterotrophic nutrition. Now, autotrophic means those that can produce their own food. They can produce their own food. The classic example being plants. Now, when we divide autotrophic nutrition, we can get two kinds of ideas. One is photoautotrophic organisms or photoautotrophic nutrition, and then the second one is chemoautotrophic. Now, photoautotrophic is relatively easy. Classic example being plants. Now, what do plants do? Plants use sunlight, plants use carbon dioxide, plants use water, and they create their own food. That is, they create glucose, and the byproduct is oxygen, which we need for our respiration. There are some organisms which can produce their own food, or which can use the nutrition from certain chemicals, especially certain kind of bacteria. We call them as chemobacteria. These use some chemicals, especially the sulfur-based chemicals are used by some bacteria. They are called as chemotrophs, meaning they use chemicals for their nutrition. So autotrophic can be photoautotrophic depending on sunlight, or chemoautotrophic, that is depending on certain chemicals. Then the second category is heterotrophic. Broadly, heterotrophic means they depend on others. They depend on other plants, or they depend on others for their food. The first category is holozoic. That means us. Humans are holozoic. That means they depend on plants for their nutrition. They depend on animals for their nutrition. We can talk about different animals as well. For example, herbivores. The herbivorous animals, they depend on grass, they depend on green plants for their nutrition. Carnivorous animals like say lion, tiger, they depend on other animals. They depend on meat for their food. So they are also heterotrophic. There is another category under heterotrophic, that is parasitic. Now these parasites, they depend completely on other organisms for their nutrition without ending them. It's not a prey for them. That means they simply suck out the nutrient or suck out the energy required for them. We have discussed some of the parasitic protozoans, right? When we talked about different cells, protozoans classically come under parasitic beings, and these parasites, they are heterotrophic. They get their nutrition from others. Apart from that, there is another category under heterotrophic, that is saprotrophic. Now saprotrophic, they get their necessary nutrients from dead material. It can be dead plants or dead animals. And the classic example for this is the fungi. Majority of fungi, they are saprotrophs. They get their nutrients from dead organic matter. So this is the kind of nutrition that we get. Now, when we talk about autotrophic, I gave you example. Autotrophic are the plants. How do plants produce their own food? They use sunlight. So plants come under the category of photoautotrophic organisms. They take carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, they take water from the soil, and they take sunlight. Photoautotrophic. Using these three, they produce their own food. That means they produce their own food. Glucose, along with it, a byproduct, oxygen is produced, which is required for us. Now, apart from that, when we talk about this process of photosynthesis, it simply runs through this reaction. As I told you, they need sunlight, carbon dioxide, water, 6CO2 plus 6H2O, C6H12O6. This is the basic formula of glucose, or the simplest of sugar, that is the monosaccharide, and then oxygen is released, which is required for maintaining the stability of our atmosphere as well, which is required for our survival as well. Apart from that, there are heterotrophs. Heterotrophs, like other unicellular organisms. Yes, we are also heterotrophs. We rely on others for food. We come under the holozoic category. Now, when we talk about unicellular organisms, let's take example of some unicellular organisms like amoeba and paramecium. Let's try to understand how they get their food or how they digest their food. Now, amoeba, it does not have any regular shape. It can change its shape. You do know that. And whenever there is a food particle which is in its vicinity, what happens? It changes its shape to form pseudopodia. This pseudopodia, it engulfs the food particle, and then eventually that food is completely digested by this amoeba. Similarly, when we talk about other protozoans like paramecium, now paramecium has specific organs for taking in food and specific organs for leaving out the waste materials. This is the classic diagram of a paramecium, where it has certain cilia. Now, using these cilia, it is going to take food inside. You can say that it has an oral groove, or you can even call it oral cavity or the buccal cavity. Once the food enters, then the food goes inside, it is digested, and once the metabolic activity is done, waste material are also produced, and those waste material, they are left out through this anal pore. A very simple kind of unicellular organism which has some input system, digestive system. That means it digests the entire food, and then the waste product is thrown out through the anal pore. So we find simple structures to complex structures, and we are one of the most complex beings, right? In humans, nutrition or the metabolic activity, it is run through the GI tract, or the digestive tract, what we call AI tract, alimentary canal, intestinal tract. Now it starts with mouth. And the food, once it enters through mouth, we chew it, it enters into esophagus. From esophagus, it enters our stomach. From stomach, it goes into small intestine. From small intestine, which is about 5 to 7 meters long, it enters the large intestine. Majority of large intestine is called colon as well. From large intestine, the waste material, it is expelled out through the anus. That is the basic nutritional setup in humans. Now, when we look at this nutrition setup, the process of nutrition, the first step is ingestion. That means taking in of food. I take, say I have a plate full of food. What do? I take a chapati, I take some vegetables, and then I crunch it. I take it in my mouth and I chew it, right? So process of taking in the food, it's called ingestion. Then the process of digestion, it starts immediately in our mouth itself, because mouth has saliva. Salivary glands are present, saliva is released. Saliva helps in breaking of carbohydrates. Saliva has salivary amylase in it, which helps in breaking down carbohydrates. Then there is the next process is absorption. That means slowly and steadily I have to absorb the basic nutrients. When I have food, say for example, if I had idli in morning, now idli along with some chutney, if I have that, it will have proteins, it will have carbohydrates, it will have certain lipids as well. That means the carbohydrates, the proteins and the lipids, it has to be broken down. For that it has to be absorbed. Where will it be absorbed? It will go into blood, and from there, from that blood, it will reach to each and every cell, where the nutrients are assimilated in our body, which is the fourth step. And then finally, the byproduct of our digestive system, that is whatever is not digested, whatever is not absorbed, assimilated, whatever waste material is left out, it is ingested. That is, egestion is the process of removal out of the waste. So this is the process. A simple MCQ can be created where I can ask you the chronological order of our digestive system. Remember, ingestion, digestion, absorption, assimilation, and egestion. This is the process. Now, where does this start? As I told you, it starts first from the mouth and the buccal cavity. Mouth and the buccal cavity. Now, as soon as I eat food, what do? I chew it. Now, for chewing, I have teeth. Now, buccal cavity, I have teeth, right? Using that teeth, I am going to tear the food, I am going to masticate it, I am going to chew it, and it is going to be mixed properly using my tongue. And in the mouth, there is already saliva in it. From mouth, the food enters esophagus. Esophagus is this particular pipe from which the food, which now we call that food, uh, which is just taken inside, it's called bolus. The bolus will pass through esophagus, it will reach into stomach. From stomach, it will move to small intestine. From small intestine, it will move to large intestine. Now, what happens? As I told you, as soon as I consume food, I chew it. Food is properly mixed inside my mouth. Digestion starts here itself because it has salivary amylase in it. As soon as I take it inside, right? As soon as I take the food inside the bolus, it enters stomach. In esophagus, there is not much of a digestion or any sort of absorption, because esophagus is more of a pipeline which enters stomach. The next step is stomach. Stomach is a J-shaped entity. It is approximately about every individual's fist, a little larger than the fist. Its capacity is somewhere around 750 ml. All right. So when the food enters here, stomach has highly acidic pH. The pH is close to 2. When I say pH of 2, it is highly acidic. Why? Because the stomach lining or the mucous lining, it will secrete the hydrochloric acid. That means the food that is inside my stomach, it has to be broken down, especially the proteins. And to break proteins, I need this acid. That's why sometimes we feel that I feel acidity. Why? Because in the stomach, the quantity of acid has become very high, and slowly and steadily that acid is simply reaching this lower esophagus. That's why you feel heartburn or you feel acidity. So what do? You take antacids. Why stomach pH is acidic? Because I want to break proteins. Acid helps in breaking down of those nutrients. Now you must be thinking, sir, food has to be broken down, and for that I have carbohydrates, I have proteins, I have lipids, and on that some kind of proteins or some kind of enzymes have to act. But stomach has highly acidic pH. Will there be any enzymes there? Yes. Stomach will have specifically one particular enzyme which is activated in the acidic medium, that is called pepsin. And this pepsin, it specifically works on proteins. It helps in breaking down of proteins. Stomach also receives some of the other digestive juices. Mainly, it helps in breaking down of proteins. And stomach is also aided by some amount of juices from liver and pancreas as well. We'll talk about liver and pancreas in some time. So food enters my mouth. From there, it goes to esophagus, then to stomach. After that, the food enters small intestine. Now, when it enters small intestine is about 5 to 7 meters long, where it has three different sections. First section is called duodenum, second is jejunum, third one is ileum. Now, when we talk about our mouth, please remember, let me just give you some idea about the pH that we have. Please remember, pH in our mouth is basic. It is basic. You must have seen it. That why do we have bad breath once we get up in the morning? Because during the night time, the microbial activity increases. That means the pH in your mouth has slowly increased a little. That's why bacterial activity has increased and your mouth stinks in the morning. Mouth pH has to be basic. That's why you brush in the morning. When you enter stomach, its pH is highly acidic. Now, from acidic, again, it has to turn to basic in the small intestine. In small intestine, it should be again basic. Especially when we reach jejunum and ileum, it has to be basic. And then when we enter large intestine, especially in the lower colon, it has to be acidic again, because it will contain high amount of urea, ammonia, uric acid. So it will be acidic in nature. All right. So from basic to acidic to again basic to acidic again. Small intestine, it receives juices or secretions from pancreas, and this pancreas is going to release pancreatic juice, which will contain pancreatic amylase, pancreatic lipase, as well as trypsin, pancreatic trypsin. They help in breaking down of carbohydrates, fats, and proteins. And here the major absorption occurs, meaning the digested food, from it the nutrients are absorbed. Now the nutrients have to be absorbed directly into the bloodstream. That's why small intestine has pillar like projection. They are called as villi. Now these villi have extensive capillary connections, and through these capillaries, you do know that nutrients can pass through capillaries. Capillaries are single celled blood vessels, which can help in to and fro transport through osmosis, to and fro transport of nutrients and other stuff as well. So here nutrients, they enter into these capillaries, and these capillaries, they will take these nutrients to individual cell for metabolic activity. So absorption and assimilation majorly occurs in small intestine. And please remember, when we talk about small intestine of other animals, especially say when I talk about small intestine of herbivorous animals and carnivorous animals, remember the carnivorous animals small intestine is actually longer. It is longer. This is a misconception among many students. They believe that since the carnivorous animals, they eat meat, and for it to be digested, small intestine has to be long. No. Herbivorous animals, they consume plants. That means they consume majority cellulose. And for breaking cellulose, the small intestine of herbivorous animals is longer than many carnivorous animals. Please remember this fact from MCQ perspective. That means most of my food is now digested, majority of it is absorbed as well, and whatever food that is left out undigested or some amount of absorption is left out, it now enters the large intestine. Large intestine is first of all wider. That means its girth is higher than small intestine, but its length is shorter. Small intestine is approximately 5 to 7 meters, whereas large intestine is hardly 1.5 meters. And most of the large intestine, it is basically even called as colon also. I can use the terms interchangeably because majority of large intestine is colon. It is divided into different sections of colon. This colon will be connected to rectum. Now, the responsibility of large intestine is mainly to absorb water, mainly to absorb residual nutrients, and whatever is undigested food, it will be stored in rectum. And when the rectum is full, it will send signals to our brain. Then the bowel movement will start, and through the anus, waste material is released. It is excreted. This is the entire life process of nutrition in human beings. Is it clear? Right. From MCQ perspective, do remember the role of small intestine. Do remember some of the enzymes. As I mentioned, amylase, it works on carbohydrates. Lipase, it works on fats. And trypsin, it works on protein. Trypsin and pepsin specifically on proteins. Apart from that, this digestive system is helped by three important glands, that is liver, gallbladder and pancreas. Liver, it releases bile juice. It is a yellow color fluid. It is a yellow color fluid which helps in digestion. It also helps in eliminating specially fats, because bile helps in emulsifying the fats. Please remember this fact. Now, whenever we talk about bad fat or cholesterol, bad cholesterol, the activity of liver is extremely important. Liver releases bile. Bile is stored in gallbladder. Whenever it is necessary in our small intestine, the gallbladder releases bile juice into small intestine, and bile juice, it helps in emulsification of fat as well as removal of bad cholesterol from our body. But it has its own limitations. If we consume more and more amount of bad cholesterol, that means the low density lipoprotein, that means saturated fats or trans fats, then it will be continuously accumulated in our body, in our muscles and in our arteries, that means blood vessels, which ultimately leads to many problems. Apart from liver and gallbladder, there is one more gland, that is pancreas. I told you pancreas releases pancreatic juice directly into small intestine. It helps first of all increase the pH. That means it helps in bringing basicity in our alimentary canal. It also has different enzymes, as I told you, amylase, lipase and trypsin, to break down carbohydrates, lipids and proteins respectively. All right, that's the nutrition setup in our body. Now, after nutrition, we have to talk about another life process, that is respiration. Please remember, respiration is a catabolic process. Respiration is a catabolic chemical process which will help in releasing of energy into cells, meaning glucose would be broken down, or glucose, it has to be utilized by our body. For that, respiration is important, and for that, oxygen is very necessary. Remember, it is a catabolic process. Now, when we talk about respiration, respiration is a process of breaking down of the nutrients, breaking down of glucose into simpler compounds. And for that, oxygen is very much necessary in our body. But in some organisms, in some living organisms, especially cells, oxygen may not be necessary. That is why respiration can be of two types. That is aerobic respiration and anaerobic respiration. Aerobic respiration, it needs oxygen. It needs oxygen to break down glucose. Glucose is broken down into simple constituents. Glucose is broken down into simple constituents like carbon dioxide and water, giving you energy when oxygen is present. But when oxygen is absent, it is called as anaerobic respiration. And if oxygen is absent, then two kinds of respiratory systems can be seen. In fact, in our body, we find two kinds of respiratory setups. One is the aerobic respiration. We also find some amount of anaerobic respiration, not in all of our cells, but especially in our muscular cells. But it is not completely anaerobic respiration. I could call it as a semi-aerobic respiration. So respiration can be of three types. First thing, you have to break down the glucose in your cytoplasm. Glucose is broken down into pyruvate. It is a 3-carbon molecule. Energy is released, and this has to be further broken down. And if oxygen is absent, in such a case, this glucose and later on pyruvate, it is converted into alcohol, that is ethanol plus carbon dioxide plus energy is released. Now, this kind of anaerobic respiration is seen in many microorganisms like fungi, typically the yeast. Apart from that, in our muscles, if I do not have enough oxygen, say I am working out, and my muscles need more oxygen, but my other life processes, they need oxygen as well. What muscles do is they will let go of this aerobic respiration, and for some time they will undergo some amount of semi-aerobic or semi-anaerobic respiration. Deficient oxygen. Now, when I say oxygen is deficient, I wouldn't say completely absent. Oxygen is deficient. Now, in such a case, what happens is this glucose in cytoplasm, it breaks down to pyruvate, where oxygen is not present. It becomes lactic acid, plus it will give you energy. This lactic acid is continuously stored in your muscles. It has to be broken down later on when oxygen is replenished back. That is why We get cramps. You must have seen, or that is why when I get up in the morning, I feel that my muscles are very tense, very stiff. Or when you work out, when you continuously run, you get cramps. What are these cramps? These cramps are due to process of anaerobic respiration by your muscles, where lactic acid has deposited, or lactic acid amount has increased. Now, what do you do in such scenario? What do? You ensure that more oxygen is available for those muscles. What do? You do some massage, or you apply some heat, you apply some sort of ointment. What happens? That muscle normalizes. You keep it moving, then oxygen will be supplied there. Once oxygen is supplied, that lactic acid would be broken down, and then normal muscular process would start. Apart from that, the normal kind of respiration is this: in presence of oxygen, carbon dioxide, water, and energy is released. This happens in almost majority of cells that we know. All right. But when we talk about respiration, now respiration in plants is reversed. In animals, they take in oxygen, they leave out carbon dioxide. Now, whatever I told you, the respiratory system, this was for animals. Now, for plants, it's much simpler. For plants, what do? They build up glucose. They build up glucose through Calvin cycle. That means they are going to take in carbon dioxide, they are going to leave out oxygen, and they are going to produce some amount of energy, that is glucose. But in us, it's the reverse. In us, it's the catabolic process. Respiratory system, or our respiratory process, it's a little complex. It starts with our nasal passage. That means I have nostrils. From my nose, I'm breathing in. That means air enters this nose, then it enters the trachea, which is also called windpipe. From this windpipe, it will be bifurcated through two bronchi into two lungs. And these lungs have bronchioles, and these bronchioles ultimately have something called as alveoli. These alveoli are millions in numbers, and alveoli have capillary structure around them. Why? To exchange the gases. Alveoli are balloon-like structures on which capillaries are wound, and these capillaries help in gas exchange. As I told you, that the breaking away, respiration is basically the process of breaking down. It is a catabolic process. And in our system, what do? We inhale air, we take in air, we give out air. But in that air, the amount of oxygen that we take in, see, we take in 21% of oxygen, we give out only 15 to 16% of oxygen. That means we use 5 to 6% of oxygen from air, and we take in 0.04% of carbon dioxide. But when we leave out, that is about 4% of carbon dioxide. That means we breathe in air, we breathe out air, but oxygen is utilized by body, carbon dioxide is expelled from the body. Why? Because the gas exchange has to take place. In my metabolic activity, as I told you, in my metabolic activity, whenever the cellular respiration takes place at mitochondria, the energy is being utilized. That means the pyruvate, first glucose, later on pyruvate, it is being converted into your energy, water plus carbon dioxide. That carbon dioxide has to be expelled out. Where is it expelled out, or where is it exchanged out? It is exchanged out through the alveoli. Alveoli are the air sacs where the gas exchange takes place. How does this gas exchange take place? This gas exchange again occurs through blood. Please remember, in our body, blood is the important carrier for your nutrients. It is the important carrier of your gases. It is the important carrier for all other chemicals like hormones or any other thing. So what happens in blood? We have a protein called as globin. We call it colloquially as hemoglobin. Now what happens? This hemoglobin, it can reversibly react with oxygen, and it can reversibly react with carbon dioxide as well. Through this reaction of oxygen, it forms oxyhemoglobin. When it reacts with carbon dioxide, it forms carbaminohemoglobin. And at the alveolar sacs, it exchanges. The reversible reaction takes place, and oxygen is taken in, carbon dioxide is expelled out. That is the basic idea of respiration. And when we talk about respiratory system or respiratory mechanism in our body, we have three kinds of respiratory mechanism or processes that run. First one is the external respiration. This is nothing but inhalation and exhalation. This is the mechanical process, the external respiration. I inhale air, I exhale air, but there is an internal respiration which is running at the alveolar site. Now here the real respiration occurs where the gas exchange is taking place. That means oxygen is taken in and carbon dioxide is left out. Please remember, at any point of time, lungs cannot be completely emptied. Even if I exhale, some amount of air is already left out. That is why we say that even if I stop external respiration for some time, say I stop external respiration for say 1 minute, right now I'm not breathing, but internal respiration is going on, right? For some time, the air would be there. Apart from that, at the cellular level, at the mitochondrial level, cellular respiration is running. Now, what is this cellular respiration? This is what I told you at the beginning. That is glucose plus your oxygen that has now been absorbed. It will be transformed into energy, plus carbon dioxide is released and water is formed. That's the basic cellular respiration that runs. Clear? So we understood our nutrition system, we understood our respiratory system. Humans have a little complicated system, but many animals, they use oxygen. Say for example, aquatic animals, they use oxygen from water. Some other organisms, they have other systems. For instance, respiration is amoeba is because of diffusion. It does not have any nostrils. Through its cell wall, there is diffusion of oxygen inside and there is diffusion of carbon dioxide outside. Similarly, in aquatic animals, what do they have? They have certain mechanism through which they take water inside and they use oxygen from the water itself through the gills, right? These animals have gills. Some organisms like earthworm, we have studied this before. How does earthworm respirate? Through its skin. It takes in oxygen again through diffusion itself. It takes it through its skin, oxygen and carbon dioxide through the skin itself. Some other organisms like frog, they again have nostrils, they have mouth cavity, and they also have lungs and other respiratory organs, very similar to how human beings have. All right, right. Let's move ahead. Now, before that, I have a small notice for all of you. Those who are preparing for UPSC Civil Service Examination, this is the golden opportunity for you, because StudyIQ has brought Prelims to Interview Initiative. If you know anybody who is preparing, please spread the word. Let them know about this program, because this is the most comprehensive program where we will be hand-holding you or guiding you through your prelims, mains, and interview, all the 3 stages. It's a very affordable program which has been priced at 29,999. If you want maximum discount, do use the code Rahul Live. Remember that the admissions are closing on 31st of July. Do it before that. All right. Let's move ahead. After understanding nutrition, that is the digestive system, and respiration, let's understand another life process, that is transportation. Now, transportation is extremely important in any living organism. When we talk about humans, I told that in humans, the system of transportation is extremely important. We have blood for transporting nutrients. We have blood for transporting gas. We have blood for transporting hormones. We'll talk about human beings first, then we'll talk about animals. So transportation is very much important for every organism. In humans, it is quite advanced. In humans, there is a connective tissue called blood, which helps in transportation of different nutrients and transportation of other things. Now, when we talk about transportation in human beings, we have a complex circulatory system. This circulatory system was discovered by William Harvey. And in us, in humans, we have a closed circulatory system, meaning the connective tissue or the fluid tissue that runs, it is never expelled out. That means it always runs through different vessels, through different pipelines. But there are some organisms where they might have open circulatory system, especially insects. In open circulatory system, there is heart, which basically pumps blood, and the blood is pumped up in open system in something called as hemocole, or it is also called simple cole. Hemo is blood itself. It is pumped into cole, where the necessary exchange takes place, exchange of nutrients, whatever exchange, and then it will be pumped out through the body continuously. Clear? We have a closed system. Now, when we look at this closed system, flow system is found in amphibians, reptiles, birds, and mammals. The blood is always flowing through different vessels. We'll talk about these vessels, and this blood is pumped through entire body by an organ called as heart. Now, this is the cross section of heart. Human heart has 4 chambers in it. It has 4 chambers in it. The upper chambers are called atria. Upper chambers are called atria. The lower chambers are called ventricles. Please remember, vent means sending out, meaning both the ventricles, they will be responsible for sending oxygenated blood somewhere, deoxygenated blood to the lungs. So blood, first of all, it enters the heart from entire body, and it also enters from the lungs. Please remember, the blood that is coming from the lungs, it is oxygenated, it is pure, and now that blood has to be pumped through entire body. Whereas there is a setup of our blood vessels which is going to bring deoxygenated blood from the entire body into heart, which has to be pumped to lungs for purification. So how it happens? Because of heart, because of these valves. This heart has 4 chambers, and the blood, when I say atrium, the blood enters atrium from the deoxygenated blood. It enters right atrium through the superior vena cava. That means from the entire body, the bad blood or deoxygenated blood, it enters right atrium, then it goes to right ventricle, then it is pumped to your lungs. Whereas from lungs, I receive good blood from the pulmonary vein. It enters the left atrium, then it enters the left ventricle. From left ventricle, it is pumped through the aorta to the entire body. This is how the circulation runs. From lungs, good blood is coming into the left atrium, then it goes to left ventricle. From left ventricle, it goes to the entire body. This is good blood. And from the entire body, the bad blood is coming through the superior vena cava. It enters your right atrium, it goes to your right ventricle, and it is sent to the lungs for purification. So blood, which is composed of cardiac muscles, it is like a pump which never stops. Our heart beats 72 times, lub dub, and it pumps blood throughout our body. The volume, the stroke volume of our heart, it varies. Say whenever I'm running, whenever I'm exercising, if I need more amount of oxygen, if I need more amount of energy, then the blood can increase its stroke volume, or it can also decrease its stroke volume according to the requirements of our body. So we have a system where there is double circulation, meaning there is a division of blood into deoxygenated and oxygenated. Now what happens? From the entire body, you will see that the oxygen poor blood, it is collected, it is sent to the heart. From the lungs, the pure blood is again collected and it is sent to the heart on the other side. That means heart is divided such that on one side there is deoxygenated blood, bad blood. On one side there is oxygenated blood, which is good blood. And this good blood has to be pumped to the entire body. Bad blood is already used by our body and it has to be sent for purification to the lungs. That's how the double circulation runs in our body. All right, so clear? So circulatory process, that is a life process. Apart from that, we have blood pressure. As I told you, we have blood pressure. Our heart is made up of cardiac muscles. Now these cardiac muscles, they continuously pump blood. That's why heart beats in a rhythmic fashion, lub dub. 72 times it beats in a minute normally. And when it beats, or when the pressure is high, it is called the systolic pressure. The systolic pressure of our blood is 120 millimeter Hg normally, and the diastolic blood, that is when it says lub 120 millimeter Hg, dub, it is diastolic pressure, that is 80 millimeter Hg. This is the normal level. That is why we say the normal blood pressure, we say, is 120 by 80. So 120 is the systolic pressure, 80 is diastolic pressure. And as I told you, whenever a person is excited, say I have run for 1 kilometer continuously, if you check my blood pressure, it will be extremely high. Why? Because the heart has the capability to alter the stroke volume according to the needs of individual. So at that time, as soon as I run, then the blood pressure would be very high. In many cases, because of certain chronic diseases, you must have seen people having high blood pressure, especially in case of diabetes. So this is the normal blood pressure level. Systolic pressure 120 mmHg, diastolic pressure 80 mmHg. Clear? Right. Now this was about the circulatory system itself, and I told you we have a closed circulatory system, and in this circulatory system we have a connective tissue called as blood. It is a fluid connective tissue, blood. Now this blood is carried out always in certain pipelines. These pipelines are called blood vessels. In our body we find three type of blood vessels. We find arteries. Arteries always carry oxygen rich blood. We have veins. They always carry CO2 rich, or I can say I'll write CO2 rich blood. Fine, it's not an issue. CO2 rich blood, that is deoxygenated blood. And there are capillaries. Which carry oxygen rich or carbon dioxide rich, depending on where they are transporting. All right. Now that means if a vein transforms into capillary, it will have deoxygenated blood. If an artery transformed into capillary, it will have oxygenated blood. Now when we look at arteries are always thick. Remember, out of these three blood vessels, artery is the thickest. Artery has multiple layers. It has a thick outer wall. It has a small lumen inside, and it is made up of thick elastic fibers of thick muscles, because it carries pressurized blood, because the heart is pushing blood. When I say love, that is at 120 millimeter Hg, blood is being pumped into the aorta. Aorta is an artery itself. So in arteries, blood is at a higher pressure. Whereas in veins, blood is of lower pressure. Why? Because the blood from entire body is now pushed towards the heart. So it is lower pressure, and that is why vein is thinner. It is not very thick, it is thinner. And that's why you must have seen that whenever a doctor gives you injection or draws blood from you, what do? They look for a vein. They never look for artery. Why? First of all, it doesn't mean that I cannot take blood from artery. Please remember that I can take blood from artery as well. But when I try to take blood from artery, first of all, the pressure is very high, and when I puncture an artery, it will take more time for repair. That's why we look for veins. So you find a vein, blood is in lower pressure, you put your syringe inside, you draw the blood, and you simply close it out with the cotton, and you will see that the healing will be very, very fast. Apart from that, we have capillaries. Now, what are these capillaries? Capillaries, as soon as arteries and veins, when they reach an organ or a tissue, what happens is they will divide into smaller vessels. And these smaller vessels, remember, they are only one cell thick. That means I can easily put something into capillaries. I can easily take out something out of capillaries through osmosis. It's like a one thick permeable membrane. That's why the gas exchange takes place. That's why the nutrient exchange takes place. Clear? So artery and veins, they transform into different capillaries. Clear? Right. Now, apart from this, our blood, that is a fluid connective tissue, it has certain other things as well. It has some things called as platelets. Now, these platelets, they help in clotting of blood. You must have seen that if you get an injury, the blood comes out and the blood clots. The blood solidifies there itself. Now, if there are no platelets in your blood, then if a small puncture is made to any blood vessel, continuous blood will flow. Platelets, and these platelets, they basically contain vitamin K, that is phylloquinone, which is responsible for blood clotting as well. Apart from this, the blood also contains lymph. Please remember that lymph or a lymphatic fluid or lymphatic tissue. These are responsible for our immune system. So from lymph, there are many cells which enter our bloodstream. The WBCs basically, which form the immune system of our body. All right. So this is the basic transportation system that we have. Now, when we look at the plants, their transportation system is not as complex as humans. Why? Because plant simply needs water. That means they would need one conduit for water transport. They also have some food in them. They will produce food. They need another conduit for transferring the food. Now we know for water transport, water has to reach from the roots to the tip, and for that you have water transport setup. Water transport setup is called as xylem. Now water, it enters roots, it reaches to the tip, and you do know because of sunlight, because of heat, there is always transpiration. Transpiration is the water loss by the plant because of sunlight, and because of this transpiration, the water can be sucked from the soil as well. So soil water reaches up because of two actions. One is the capillary action, the other one is the transpiration pull. As I told you, the transportation in plants is less complex. They have two different kind of conduits. We have already discussed these two different kind of tissues. These are called vascular tissues. They have xylem for water transport, xylem for water transport, water plus minerals, of course. Please remember, this is always one way. That means from roots towards the shoot. They also have a conduit or a vascular tissue which is called as phloem. Phloem, it is a two-way system. Phloem is a two-way system. That means the movement of material is upwards as well as downwards. And what do they transport? They transport water, they transport food, they transport nutrients, they transport minerals, that they can transport everything. Please remember this. Please remember, xylem is a one-way conduit, phloem is a two-way conduit. We have also discussed different kinds of cells that are present in xylem and phloem, like the tracheids, etc. All right, in our previous class. So this is the simple transportation system in plants. All right. Right. Next, move on to the next life process. Living organisms, living cells, you do know they undergo metabolic activity. What is the meaning of metabolism? That means they are going to use the nutrients, they are going to use the inputs. For us, we use nutrients, we use oxygen, we use water to run our metabolic activity. And after that metabolism is done, energy is released. I need heat and energy for survival, but some waste byproduct is also produced. And to remove that waste byproduct, I have life process called as excretory systems. In humans, the excretory system is something like this. Excretory organ, main excretory organ is kidney. From kidney, two ureters emerge. We have two kidneys. Kidneys are bean shaped. Two ureters emerge, and in these ureters, concentrated urine in which waste material is already there. It is collected in the urinary bladder, and when the urinary bladder is full, then we expel out this urine through the urethra. That's the basic excretory system. Now, for any metabolic system, I told you that our cells perform certain work. They release energy, and they also release waste products. Now, these waste products, again, at the cellular level, mitochondria, at the mitochondrial level, I say, mitochondria is inside the cell. In the mitochondria, the Krebs cycle is running. When the Krebs cycle runs, I use glucose, I use oxygen to give you energy, I give you liquid water, and then carbon dioxide is released. Apart from that, there are some other waste byproducts that are released, and those byproducts, they again enter your bloodstream. Why? Because blood is the only connective fluid tissue which is responsible for transporting everything. It transports oxygen, carbon dioxide, it transports nutrients, it transports hormones, it also transports your waste materials. So waste material, they now enter your blood. Now from this blood, it has to be cleared. Now what is the waste material that is left out after all the nutrients are utilized and after it is assimilated? The cellular respiration, it will give out the ions or the compounds which are not useful for us. For example, sodium ions which are in excess, potassium ions which are in excess, ammonia, uric acid, urea. These are the waste products that are produced, and these waste products, they have to be expelled out of blood. They have to be expelled out of blood. Now, how do you expel it out of blood? It is expelled by the kidney. We have two kidneys. Kidneys are bean shaped, and when you look at the cross section of kidney, you will find kidneys having millions of nephrons. Millions of nephrons. And each nephron is having a complex connection of different capillaries. There are millions of nephrons. Each nephron, it looks something like this. When I take a cross section and zoom in, then this is an individual nephron. Remember, there are millions of nephrons which are connected, and what happens? the blood capillaries, they form a network around these nephrons. And when blood moves through these capillaries, what happens? The nephron, it absorbs the waste material. It can release water, excess water. It can also release or absorb or release some other ions and other secretions. So what happens when the blood moves through this nephron, whose main part is this Bowman's capsule? Bowman's capsule or glomerulus. The Bowman's capsule, the blood vessel through it, it is called as glomerulus. When the blood moves through it, the Bowman's capsule or the nephron, it is going to absorb the waste material from blood. Directly waste material is absorbed now into nephron. Now this nephron, it has certain other parts like the proximal convoluted tube here, the distal convoluted tube here, and this is the loop of Henle. Please remember that nephron, it has a descending loop of Henle and an ascending loop of Henle. So these convoluted tubes, proximal and distal convoluted tube, what do? They help in reabsorption and secretion into the filtrate. That means blood is now filtered, and this filtrate, it enters. This filtrate, it has to be continuously concentrated. Why? Because if I have to remove ammonia from my body, ammonia in a dissolved form in water, it is extracted or it is filtered in the glomerulus and it reaches inside this nephron. But you do know, if too much of water is wasted as urine, you will see a lot of dehydration in our body. That means some amount of water has to be reabsorbed back by the blood vessels. Some other waste products have to be given out. Some useful ions which have been absorbed along with the waste material, that have to be given back. So in the proximal convoluted tube and the distal convoluted tube, reabsorption and different secretions take place. And similarly, in the loop of Henle, in the descending loop of Henle and the ascending loop of Henle, water, excess water which has been captured as the filtrate, it is given back to the blood vessels, and other secretions and other reabsorptions, they take place in the loop of Henle as well. And the final filtrate, it passes from here and enters the ureter. And once from the ureter, I told you, from the ureter, once it reaches the urinary bladder, once this urinary bladder, it gets full, it sends signal to our brain that it's time now to urinate, to pass the urine, and urine is passed out. Now this passing out of urine, it is called as the process of micturition. The release of urine is called as process of micturition, and the reflex, it is called as micturition reflex. Please remember this as well. This is the excretory system in humans. Please remember, human digestive system or human alimentary canal is not the excretory system primarily. Our primary excretory system is the kidney and its functions. All right. Now, apart from that, there are some other excretory organs also, but their primary role is not excretion. Please remember, lungs help in excretion or removal of carbon dioxide. Your skin helps in excretion of excess salts, right? Your liver, it helps in removal of cholesterol. So these can also be dubbed as excretory organ, but not exclusively. Apart from this, there is one more pointer that you need to remember. I told you we have a pair of kidneys. That means we have two kidneys. Imagine one of your kidney has stopped functioning, or imagine both your kidneys have stopped functioning. And kidney is an organ which you can donate also. That means I can transplant kidney from one person to another person, depending on the match, right? Depending on the blood match and other parameters which doctors would decide. That means if, say, imagine both my kidneys are not working, can I survive? I can survive, because these days medical advancement has happened and we have created different machines like hemodialysis, artificial kidney or hemodialysis. That means every 2 to 3 weeks, what do I do? If my kidneys are not working, every 2 to 3 days, what would happen is I would go to a setup where there is a dialysis kit, and using this dialysis kit, all the blood, it will circulate through the dialysis machine, and what kidney performs, it is performed by this dialysis machine, and blood is purified. Now, a person who is undergoing hemodialysis, they need to undergo this process according to doctor's advice, or in general every 2 to 3 weeks once. And the cost of dialysis, it depends. Now these days the cost of dialysis is slowly and steadily going down. If I'm not wrong, per session it costs somewhere around 2000 rupees. So every 2 to 3 weeks a session of dialysis will help in cleaning your blood out. In fact, these machines are also being sold by big companies now. They are up to the tune of say 6 to 7 lakhs approximately. Not very sure with the price, but hemodialysis is a process of artificial purification of your blood. Whatever kidney does, since your kidneys are not doing it, this dialysis machine will perform that job. Right? Right. Now, apart from this, we know that plants, they do not have any specific excretory system or excretory organs, but we know it has stomata. Now, stomata, it expels, according to plant, the waste product is oxygen, which is very useful for us. So it expels out oxygen. Similar to that, plants, they do also excrete. For example, oxygen itself is a waste product for a plant. It is excreted out. Similarly, excess water is excreted out. Dead cells or some kind of cellulose or some parts which are stored inside the cell, they are expelled out in different forms. For example, as I told you, gaseous waste is expelled through the stomata. For a plant, oxygen is a byproduct, it is a waste product, so it is expelled out. That is excretion for it itself. Similarly, water vapor, excess water, it leaves the plants through transpiration or even in form of dew. Apart from that, you must have seen many a times solid waste which is stored inside the plant vacuoles, it is excreted sometimes through the leaf itself, or dead cells or other waste material or the excreta which is stored inside the vacuole, it is expelled out as gums and resins. So in plants, we do have certain excretory mechanisms, but not as extensive or as complex as present in the human beings. And remember, it's a very strange thing. The the things that is considered as waste for the plants, oxygen, it is very useful for us. Water is very useful for us. And these things, even the excreted product of the plants, they are very useful. Gums and resins are very useful economically and from the health perspective also for humans. All right. So these are some of the life processes from chapter 6, and in our subsequent discussion we'll talk about some other complex biology concepts like heredity, control and coordination, and then we'll also talk about how organisms reproduce in our subsequent discussion. That is it in this particular video. Thank you for watching this, and if you have liked this video, you can always follow me on my social media handle at the rate Rahul Sai 222. If you have any queries, doubts, you can always message me or drop a message there on Instagram. I do respond on Saturdays and Sundays. Thank you very much again. Jai Hind.